Oh, read it and like, oh, Well, it's 2:07 and I'm only seeing four people. So I think I waited long enough. So let me begin. Now, if I remember correctly, the last thing we were doing is that we were looking at lordosis and those sorts of things, right? So let's pick up from there, shall we? I'm just going to review briefly the lordosis, kyphosis, etc. Okay. So lordosis, well, no, let's not start there. Let's start with the one everybody knows, scoliosis. As you know, scoliosis is an abnormal lateral curvature of the spine. Basically, the spine bends to the side, right? Whereas kyphosis is an abnormal anterior bend of the spine. So the spine bends forward. And lordosis is a posterior bend to the lower lumbar region, right? As it says, it's an accentuated lumbar curvature. So when you look at scoliosis, you can see that you can have thoracic, you can have lumbar, you can even have cervical, though that's very rare, scoliosis, right? And I also mentioned to you that to correct this problem, it of course requires surgery. If you go online and type in scoliosis treatments, you'll see a lot of people selling like special braces for scoliosis that you wear around your chest and all sorts of things that promise to straighten your spine in no time. No, unsurprising for the most part, those things don't work, right? You have real significant scoliosis, you're going to have surgery. In some cases, the doctor will actually, or the surgeon, I should say, will actually have to break the spine, as in break the vertebra away from one another, and then pull them into alignment. Then you will have to pin them in alignment. Okay. I mentioned to you that's the work of hours and hours, right? And kyphosis now, here we have the curvature of your thoracic vertebra. As you can see, this is a more severe curvature, right? Just remind everybody about the curves. That's the way the spine is set up. You have multiple curves in the spine, right? So in the cervical region, you have the cervical curvature, which is this way. And then you have the thoracic curvature, which is this way. So kyphosis is an extreme curvature of your thoracic spine, right? So it's not going back against the spine, it's going in the same direction. Spine is curving, it just curves a lot more than it should. Whereas your lumbar or lordosis is an extreme curvature of the lumbar spine. Once again, it heads in the same direction of curvature as the lumbar vertebra. It's just that the curve made by lumbar vertebra is much more extreme. Okay. So you should be able to easily remember the difference between kyphosis, lordosis, and of course, scoliosis, right? Now this is also showing here, of course. Sorry. Some of the conditions I didn't mention, like swayback. in sway back, you can see here that there's a more posterior curvature of the lumbar and sacral vertebra. So it's basically the sacral vertebra just pretty much lean towards the posterior. So when the lumbar attaches to the sacral, that also puts a lean in it, which is why the whole person seems like they're leaning, right? And of course, we already did lordosis, kyphosis, and there's no scoliosis in this one, but of course we have it here, right? Now, that said, let's continue from where we left off in the appendicular skeleton. I mean, I just mentioned lordosis and kyphosis again because I just want to make sure everybody understands that, right? What? One second here, I'm getting a error message. All right, please let me know if you're not seeing my screen. You should be seeing it, I think.
Not seeing it.
No, you're not. All right, hold on. All right, you should be seeing it now. Okay, so where were we? Yeah. So we were speaking now about the appendicular skeleton. I already mentioned lordosis and kyphosis and those things already. I already mentioned to you that bone markings, once again, we've already gone through these. It's just for you to have the examples in mind. So if you're asked to do so, you can provide one, right? Now, we also spoke about the appendicular skeleton and how the appendicular skeleton is basically made up of bones and girdles attached to the bones, right? And vice versa. So we have, for example, a pectoral girdle made up mainly of your clavicle, your scapula, and your humerus, okay? So those are the bones involved in that joint. You also, of course, have a pelvic girdle, which is made up of your pelvic bone, your acetabulum, your femur, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So we went through the scapula and spoke about the major regions of the scapula associated with the formation of joints, right? And I said to you, the most important thing with regards to these bones is how they form the joints. So when you look at the bone, make sure you remember all the structures associated with the formation of joints, and you should be okay for the most part, right? And of course, we spoke about the humerus, and we spoke about how the humerus forms a joint, of course, with the scapula. We spoke about the head of the humerus and how the head is relatively shallow because, of course, the point of attachment of the humerus is also relatively shallow, right? And I think we also mentioned that the shallowness here of this joint gives advantages and disadvantages, right? So the glenoid cavity here is, of course, where your humerus head would fit. And because of how shallow the cavity is and how shallow the head of the humerus is, it means that you can move around your arm to some fair degree near 360, right? So you can spin your arm all the way around, you can reach up, you can reach forward. I mean, you don't have as much movement towards the back, you can't reach all the way back. Then again, some people can, but that's because of ligaments. Now, I also mentioned the problem with this shallow joint here is, yes, it provides a greater range of movement, which is always lovely, but because it is, of course, shallow, I mentioned to you that this kind of joint is very easy to pick up a dislocation in. It's easy for this joint to fall apart. And by that I mean the head of the humerus to slip out of the glenoid cavity here. Right? So in boxing, people get punched on the shoulders, you know, the bone just pops right out. Or you can simply trip and fall, hit the ground, boom. And as you hit the ground with your shoulder, assuming, it causes the head of the humerus just to pop out again, right? So it is relatively easy to dislocate your shoulder, which of course is a problem, right? So yes, it provides you an increased range of movement, but it can also end up with you being debilitated. So you have to think about that, right? Now, with that said, I do believe we also spoke about the distal end of the humerus, right? We spoke about how it forms a joint with the ulna and the radius. I remember mentioning the capitulum and the trochlea in particular because of their association with the elbow joint, right? And when we move past this, I remember speaking about the ulna and the radius and how the ulna makes up the majority of the forearm bones associated with your elbow joint, okay? Because the ulna has on it an olecranon process, and the olecranon process is where the distal end of the humerus would sit, right? Your radius comes also up to the joint itself, but it is more there for stabilization purposes than for formation of a joint purposes. So yes, it's still important, but it is not really making up the joint. It just helps to reinforce the joint, right? Now, once again, we're most interested in aspects of these bones that are associated with joints. So the olecranon process and the trochlear notch and the coronoid process. Please ensure you can label these aspects of these bones because once again, they're close enough to be associated with the joint. In the distal end now of the forearm bones, we also are now going to have structures that are important. First of all, the ulna, as I mentioned before, is pivotal in the formation of the elbow joint. Now the radius is going to be pivotal in the formation of the wrist joint. I also would have mentioned, right? So we have spoken about the fact that the radius widens towards the wrist, right? It widens towards the wrist and allows for the attachment to your well, I mean basically your wrist bones, right? And we mentioned some of those wrist bones as well, right? So we spoke about the trapezium and the trapezoid bone, spoke about the lunate bone and the pisiform bone and the capitate bone. And I said to you, it's going to be fairly important for you to remember the names of these bones, right? As a matter of fact, the hand in general is extremely important because, of course, we use our hands for virtually everything. Not only that, the hand is quite commonly damaged, right? Lots of people have accidents where their hands are involved, right? Simply because we're always utilizing our hands. So you need to know the bones of the hand, the bones of the wrist, okay? Now we went through, I think I mentioned to you that pretty much the hardest part of this whole thing is remembering the bones of the wrist, the lunate and the scaphoid and the capitate and all of these bones. because the bones of the palms and digits, the fingers, are much easier to remember because those are, of course, listed 1 to 5. So starting at the thumb part of your palm, so your thumb connects to the palm, that bone there is going to be bone number 1. And then, of course, going all the way to the next side of the palm, the bone attached to the little finger is going to be bone number 5. So just 1 to 5 should be nice and easy to remember. And the finger bones are even easier to remember because we're not naming them individually. We just call them phalanges, right? And we mentioned that the thumb has 2 phalanges, right? 1 proximal, 1 distal. But the other fingers have proximal, medial, and distal phalanges. So they have 3 phalanges. And I also mentioned that this little space here, you see, this little space here, you see between the thumb bones and the other fingers is very important because this space is required for you to grab onto something, to form a fist, right? If the space is too long, you will not be able to fold your fist properly. It's too short, of course. It also interferes with you making a fist. So the space in between those 2 bones is extremely important. So keep that in mind for me, right? Now, did we get to this point? Anyway, let's assume we're just starting this. So now, as it says there, the pelvic girdle now is strongly attached to the axial skeleton. I mentioned to you when we were looking at the axial skeleton that the reason your sacrum is fused is because the weight of the entirety of your upper torso sits on the sacrum. And because of that, it has to have the ability to resist that mass, right? And that is the reason, of course, why your sacral bones are fused. So you have 5 sacral bones fused together. And of course, as you can see here, sacral bones run between both halves of your pelvis or hip. Right? Now, they are strongly attached to the hip bones. Right? Strongly attached to the hip bones. Why is that? Because, of course, the hip bones help to give stability to your lower body and middle body. By that I mean the weight of your body sits on the sacrum, is then transferred to your pelvis, and then from there that weight is transferred down to your leg bones. So it is very important to have a strong pelvis to help sustain or maintain or keep upright your body, however you want to put it, right? Now, because that joint is under so much more pressure, the pubic joint down here, well, I should say the joint that is formed with the femur is under so much more pressure. You expect, therefore, the joint here to be a much deeper joint. You're expecting the head of the femur to go in much further so that the joint itself is reinforced properly. Because your arms aren't really bearing the weight of your body. They're just bearing the weight of whatever you're carrying, right? Whereas your, of course, legs are bearing the weight of your entire body. So the joint that attaches them has to be particularly strong. All right, so the glenoid cavity joint, relatively weak joint. That's why you get dislocations. The joint here, the thigh with the femur, much stronger joint, right? Now that said, and we'll mention the joint again a little later. Let's talk now about the 3 main sections of your pelvic girdle. So like how we spoke about the main sections of the pectoral girdle, scapula, clavicle, and of course the head of the humerus, that makes up the joint there. The hip now, the pelvis, I should say, has three major sections to the bones, which are, of course, please remember, irregular bones. We have the ilium, the ischium, and the pubis. So ilium, ischium, and pubis, right? Now, the ilium itself, as you can see here, is just this part here. Right? So that is the ilium. Normally, when you say you put your hands on your hips, you're basically putting them in the area of your ilium, right? Now, obviously, it means, of course, that there's going to be some difference in the way that the hips of a female and a male will look, right? But we'll get to that in a second. It mentions here that you have an iliac crest that runs anterior superior to the superior iliac spine, so the crest. You have a greater sciatic notch. Oops. And which forms a part of the acetabulum, which of course is right here. So the notch, and this is the acetabulum. Now, as it says here, which receives ball-shaped head of the femur. So this hip joint here, this is the one with the acetabulum. As it mentions, the pocket of it is very, very deep, because as we mentioned before, the weight of your entire body is sitting essentially on that joint, right? Now, below the ilium, you would have the ischium. You can see here that the ischium is below the acetabulum. So don't forget, this is acetabulum. So the ischium is basically the posterior aspect of your hip joint, of your hip, I should say, right? It mentions here that ischium has a body, a ramus, a ischial spine, and a tuberosity. I am not going to ask you to do any more than being able to label this diagram here. Okay? So for example, you can see here the iliac crest. You can see the spine here. So fundamentally, what I want you to remember is the three main portions of your pelvis. I want you also to remember how to label this diagram here. So you should be able to tell me which part comes first, etc., etc. You should also be able to tell me about why the ball and socket joint, which is what it is, at the pelvis is so much stronger than most of the other joints in your body, right? Now, let's talk now about the pelvis with regards to the differences between males and females, right? Contrary to popular belief, we still only have the two, right? Now, generally speaking, the male pelvis has to carry more weight than the female pelvis. Why? Males are bigger, males are heavier, hence males have to carry more weight on their pelvis. Easy as that, right? So as it says here, they're large and heavy. So the male pelvis is relatively large and relatively heavy, because once again, it's carrying more weight around. While in comparison, the female's pelvis, of course, is going to be lighter and have thinner bones, because the female is trying to reduce her mass, right? While the male really is not. It mentions here a heart-shaped pelvic inlet versus an oval one. When you look at the pelvic inlet is basically the way that runs in between the bones, and I'll show you in a minute. The pelvic inlet is heart-shaped in males and oval in females. So why is there a difference in the shape? So here we have the female pelvic inlet right here. Here's the males. See, this makes sense there. Uh, Let me explain why okay, I'm not talking about the pelvis itself, and I'm talking about the pelvic inlet, basically the space within the pelvic bones. Okay. There's a reason the space itself can't be shaped like a butterfly, right? I mean, we can always say that the pelvis, when you look at it, it kind of looks like a butterfly shape. I mean, honestly, I don't see it, but maybe. But when it comes to the actual opening right here, it has to be oval or round. Simply because, of course, childbearing. Now, when the head of the child hits the pelvis, right? So it is now moved into the vagina, it's on its way out. Birth canal, right? It has to then pass between the two halves of the pelvic girdle, right? To get out. So the head has to pass through here. It has to squeeze through. Now, being oval, and the head is relatively oval, I'm not going to say it's easy, because childbirth is never easy, even when it's regular, right? But it's easier for the head to pass through here. Now look over at the males. Look at the shape of the opening in here. Can you imagine the child they try to squeeze through this, the oval head? You just cut a big gouge in the top of the child's head, right? Because it is not designed to fit through this. So hence the female's pelvic inlet has to be oval, right? Because baby. What about the males? Why is the males one not oval? Why does it have a totally different shape? Yes, baby, fair enough. But also, it helps to strengthen the pelvis itself by having a smaller space in between, and then because the space itself is not an oval, you get a reinforcement of the strength of the male pelvis. So remember, the female's pelvis is, the bones are lighter and thinner, plus there's an oval space there. The male bones are heavier and bigger. Should mention bigger as well. And there is a more V shape, right? So overall, the difference in the male and the female pelvis is down to performance. Females have to give birth. They need these changes in order to ensure that they give birth to healthy offspring. The males don't give birth. Instead, what they need is a way to increase their fighting ability, their hunting and gathering ability, basically. So this is what the shape essentially amounts to, right? All right. So what else do we have here? Pelvic outlet is comparatively large. No surprise there. The pelvic outlet in females has to be large because, of course, the baby's head has to pass through it. It also mentions the subpubic angle is large. The subpubic angle, of course, is right here. Where is right here? Versus the males. So the males have a more acute angle, right, than the females do. Once again, it is because, well, the female's pelvis is broader than the male's. Sorry. Somebody's burning something in the place. Anyway, it's broader than the male's, but it's also narrower, right? So the pelvis is wider than that of a male's, of the same size, of course, but it is also narrower, right? This way too. So you should be able to easily look at a male pelvis and a female pelvis and tell the difference. Because the female pelvis is short and broad. It's also thinner and lighter, with an oval opening in between the pelvic bones. Whereas the males, of course, is larger, taller, and it has a more V-shaped opening in your between your pelvic bones, right? Also, of course, the angle wasn't mentioned here. The pelvic outlet angle is broader in females than in males, simply because the pelvis itself is also broader. Now, see if this one makes sense to you. In females, the coccyx is more flexible and it tends to be straighter than in the males. Now, obviously, the coccyx doesn't have a lot of function in the human body, right? It's mostly vestigial. But there are some muscles attached to the coccyx, right? So it does, as I mentioned before, have a stabilizing function, right? It helps to basically keep you upright, right? It helps, right? Just a little, but still, it helps. When the woman is giving birth and the baby is pushing through past the sacrum, the coccyx has to be able to be pushed out of the way. The coccyx here, as the baby is coming past, has to be able to flex away from the baby to give the baby a little bit more space to maneuver through, right? So everything we've been describing so far, of course, is in aid of getting that baby out, right? Getting a baby stuck is not a good idea. Well, I mean, obviously you're not planning it, but it's not a good thing to happen, right? Whereas the more narrow angle in the males, of course, is directly correlated with the fact that the male's pelvis is longer than the female pelvis. I mean, I'm assuming everybody can see that, right? You notice that you can clearly see the male pelvis is taller. Oops. Whatever, you can see what I'm talking about, right? Now, the height of the male pelvis plus the narrow angle after the pubis all add strength to the male's pelvis. It forms areas of muscle attachment for the male pelvis. So overall, you get better physical performance out of the male pelvis. Now, what the male pelvis can't do, of course, is give rise to children. It's not designed for that, right? Some funny business has been going on in the last few years. For example, in France right now, I'm told that they're attempting the transfer. It's called the uterine transfer. The idea is that they're taking the sexual reproductive organs of a female and they're transferring it to a male. The idea is that they would make the pseudo vagina of a trans person and then connect now the uterus to that pseudo vagina. And that technically speaking, that male could get pregnant, right? If I'm honest, it's an interesting concept. And if the male is happy to do it, who am I to tell him no, right? But it would be interesting to see if it works. Because it means, of course, that in a few years, you're going to have trans people clamoring to get these surgeries. I don't doubt it. That said, as usual with these kind of things, a few points are missed. For example, even if you can get the uterus fully functional in the male, it is still not the male's uterus. It will not give rise to his children. It will give rise to the children of the female who donated that uterus, right? Which is always interesting, right? Also, because of the major differences I mentioned to you between the male and female pelvis, there's no way in heck a man could ever give quote unquote natural childbirth, right? In addition to all of these things to do the male pelvis, the transsexual person will not have a properly functional vagina. The muscles will not be strong enough, right? will be very difficult to push that baby into the quote unquote vagina. For them to, and even if they did try, the baby's head would get stuck right here as it tries to push itself into the birth canal, which of course would be artificially made up by humans, right? So I just don't see how it's gonna work. That said, you're slated to hear about it next year. So you can keep your eyes on that one, right? Now, moving away from the pelvis, remember, I'm only interested in the differences between the male and the female pelvis and the major sections of the pelvis. So ilium, ischium, and the pubis, right? That's all I'm really interested in, and your ability, of course, to label this diagram, right? Once you can do that, for the most part, you should be fine. Now, that said, let's move on to our lower limb bones. We already mentioned that the acetabulum is a part of the ischium that's going to form the joint. Where is it? There you go. Acetabulum. So here's the acetabulum, and you can see here that you have the pubic bone and the ischium contributing towards the acetabulum, right? Which, remember, forms the socket for the femur to fit in, okay? So now the femur is, here's the thing about the femur. If you ever seen like old cartoons or something with wild natives running around the place bashing people over the head with bones, this is normally the bone that you're getting bashed with. The reason for it is because the femur is an extremely human bone. The femur is a human bone, and that sounds ridiculous when I say it like that, right? But here's the thing. Virtually no other animal on the planet has a femur that looks like this. Because human beings are one of the very, 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 very few animals that their primary mode of locomotion is upright. So, I mean, we could say, okay, well, a kangaroo is also upright, but yes, but they're not running, they're not walking. The orientation of their bones is very, very different. So you can't confuse a kangaroo, well, maybe, if you don't know what you're doing. But for the most part, they look very different. But anytime you see a bone that looks like this, I don't think anybody would confuse this for anything except a human bone, okay? So what do we have here? The femur, the proximal end of the femur, has this very large neck, right? Has this big old neck. Okay. Has this big old neck right here, which is coming off of the femur at an angle, as you can see here, right? And the angle there is designed to help disperse the weight of the body more efficiently to reduce the impact of the weight on the neck itself. The head, of course, is going to fit into the acetabulum in the point on again. Oh, there you go. The head, of course, is designed to fit into the acetabulum to form that joint with the acetabulum. As we said, the acetabulum itself is a fairly deep pocket, which means that which is one of the reasons you need a fairly long neck on your femur. So that sits fairly deep within the pelvis. Now, you still get a fair range of motion because, of course, the head is round and the socket is round. So there's a lot of rotation possible here, right? But once again, this is because human beings walk upright. That's the reason it's there. That's the reason it's like this. And even though you do get the ability to rotate pretty much 360, there's also a lot more narrowing of the range of motion in comparison to your humerus. You can raise your hand over your head like you're telling TJ you want to answer a question. For the most part, the average person, obviously there are a couple of people who can do this, can't just raise their foot up off the ground without the assistance of their hand, helping them to pull up, right? And one of the reasons why it is so difficult to do that is the acetabulum. When you look at it, you can see it has a lip on it, right? That, and of course, add to that the angle of the pelvis means that it is very, very hard to raise that leg without hitting into the pelvic bones and reducing your range of motion. Okay? Now, the people who can raise their legs above their heads, remember, usually you see them grabbing the leg and helping to pull it. Why do they do this? Because the muscles that are attached to the bone here are not designed to pull the bone up straight. Right? That is why it is so much more impressive when you see somebody raise their foot off the ground. Remember, what I mean is this. A person is standing up straight and just lifts one leg straight up or as far up as they can go. Believe it or not, as I said, it is actually very hard to do, right? I don't know if any of you know any gymnasts or anything like that, but they'll be able to tell you that is really hard to do because normally when you try to raise your leg, your body wants to bend away from the direction you're raising your leg in. That is, of course, because of the angle here, right? The angle we get here makes it more difficult to do that. But notice, because the female pelvis is broad, right? It doesn't taper down to a V like the male pelvis. It's actually easier for a female to do this, to lift her foot, her leg, foot, whatever, up straight, than it is for a male to do it. Because there's less obstruction. I mean, it's not an accident, right? That so many sports, gymnastics, the females are like really big into those sports. Because first of all, the pelvis itself, the position of it, gives women a lower center of gravity, which means it's easier to balance, right? Then you throw in that, hey, it is easier for you to move your legs around in unusual directions because of your wider pelvis. Makes sense that females would want to do gymnastics, right? Even when you look at male gymnastics, you don't see a lot of flexibility in comparison to what you see in female gymnastics. You see a lot of flipping and power moves, and things like that, but you don't see a lot of flexibility, which is why, of course, male and female gymnastics look so different, right? Anyway, so back to this. So remember now, the head fits into the acetabulum, the pelvis. The neck, of course, is going to be the weakest part of the system because if you think about it, when you're standing upright, the weight is coming straight down, right? Which means this part here, so, is bearing a lot of weight on it, and it is running through the neck, right? So the neck has to be fairly robust to resist the pull of gravity and the weight of your body, right? I'm not going to worry so much about the condyles and epicondyles here, right? And we already mentioned what the patella is for. So once again, you're going to look at the bones, the bones, the ends of the long bones, and those are the ones you're going to concentrate on in terms of labeling, right? So once again, we have articular cartilage at the end of the bone. And this one, of course, is over the head of the femur, right? So slide down here, so now. So remember now, this is the hip joint. This is going to be the knee joint down here. So in the proximal end now of this limb, sorry, distal end, you have now your knee joint, okay? Now, once again, make sure you can label the major structures at the ends of the bones. I'm not going to tell you exactly what to remember. Just remember, ends of the bones are super important. Now, once you hit the knee joint and you pass there, you are, of course, going to be now in the region of the leg. Now, Jamaican people have this weird way of calling everything below the waist a foot. You know, somebody, you trip and you fall and you injure your thigh. You go to the hospital and your response is, I hurt my foot. And doctor says, show me where, and then you point to your thigh. Because in Jamaica, we call that foot. You know, you bang your knee, Lord, I hurt my foot. I've heard people say that too, which makes no sense, but you know. Or sometimes they'll say, it's rare, but sometimes they say my leg, you know, my leg cut. And when they point to, they're pointing to, of course, the region of the thigh. So remember how this goes. The thigh contains the femur, the leg contains the tibia and the fibula. All right. So those are your lower limb bones. Tibia is the bigger of the two bones, and it makes up a good percentage of your knee joints. And the fibula is the thinner of the two bones and helps to stabilize your ankle joint. Okay? So tibia, fibula. Now, these two bones are held together. I should have mentioned this before, because the same thing happens with the ulnar and the radius. They're held together by a strip of fiber right here, which is the crural interosseous membrane. This helps to hold the two bones together so that when they're flexing on a force, they don't pull away from one another, all right? Which of course means they add to the strength of your forearm, right? So keep that in mind. You're going to have tissue between the bones, not just of this, but also of your ulnar and radius, right here, or the antebrachial interosseous membrane here. And holding these bones together helps, of course, to strengthen the overall bones, right? Make it more resistant to damage, obviously, right? Now, oops. Sorry, give me 1 quick second, please. 1 quick second. I need to blow my nose. All right, sorry about that. One of my kids brought home some pathogen or the other from school as usual. So now I'm trying to suffer through it. Anyway, so tibia, fibula, right? So as I said to you, the tibia is a main component of your knee joint, and the fibula helps to form the ankle joint, okay? You can see how the tibia broadens at the knee joint, whereas the fibula actually doesn't reach the height of the joint. Instead, it forms a joint with the fibula itself. And this, of course, the position of this joint is important because as it sits here with the fibula essentially forming a joint below the widened head of the tibia, means this here is a supporting joint. It's like a pillar in a building that the roof sits on, okay? And of course, down here, so now, we don't have that arrangement. Instead, we have the widened end once again of your tibia, and then we have our fibula being longer, moving more towards the anterior aspect of the ankle joint, okay? And of course, we mentioned the interosseous membrane already holding the two bones together. Just like the where was it? The interbrachial interosseous membrane up here. It holds the bones together so that when you're lifting things and moving things around, and you put force on the bone and the bones are bending, they never bend enough to separate from one another, right? So it holds them together. Alrighty. And remember, once again, make sure that you can label the structures on the ends of the bone for me, please, right? So we're talking about this here and this here. Okay? Make sure you can label them, because once again, anything that forms a joint is important, right? All right. Now let's talk now about the ankle joints and their other foot bones. Okay. Now, obviously, the ankle bones are going to form joints with the tibia and fibula, right? So it mentions that there are 7 tarsal bones in the foot. Remember, the tarsal bones are the equivalent of the carpal bones. Okay. So tarsal bones are for the foot, and the carpal bones are, of course, for the wrist. Okay. I'm assuming y'all will mix those up, right? So as it says here now, the talus, which is a very big bone, is going to articulate with the tibia and the fibula anteriorly, as well as with the calcaneal bone posteriorly, right? So these are the 2 major bones that are going to be associated now with the ankle joint. Major because, of course, they're the biggest ones, right? So remember now, you're going to have your talus here. The tibia and the fibula will connect here via a joint. And then the bones are big enough, the tibia and the fibula, they also go backwards and also connect here with the calcaneal bone, right? So let me just label them real good here. So talus, and calcaneal bone. Calcaneal bone. Now the calcaneal bone makes up your heel, right? Calcaneal equals heel. So this, of course, is when you rock back, you're rocking back onto your heel. Your heel, of course, you see how big and heavy this bone is? It is once again because the weight of your body is sitting on your heel, okay? You can also see how thick the talus is as well, right? So these are the 2 major bones that make up your ankle joint. Once again, the major ones, I'm not saying any of the others are not involved, it's just that those 2 are extremely involved, right? Now, other bones of the foot are your cuboid. You can see the cuboid here. So the calcaneal is posterior, cuboidal bone is anterior to it, anterior lateral. Then now we have our navicular bone, which is one thing in comparison to the trochlea, I should say the talus, is anterior medial, right? So obviously, I'm going to ask you to learn the major bones of your ankle joint. So you need to know the names of the tarsal bones and their positions, right? So in case you're given a diagram to label or something like that, which is possible on your in-course test, that you can do so, right? Now, just like with the carpal bones, metacarpal bones, sorry. The metatarsal bones here are also numbered, right? Now we're starting once again with the big toe. So and that's how we come back to 5, right? So in the hand, we started with the thumb, right? And in the foot, we start, of course, with the big toe. Why is that? Because fundamentally, the big toe is a thumb, right? It has a very similar joint to the one you find in your thumb. But of course, our ancestors would have had a greater space between the thumb and the thumb, between the big toe and the middle toe right here, right? Now, the reason for that, of course, would be for climbing. If you look at monkeys, you'll notice that their feet and hands are not massively dissimilar. So when they're climbing, they would have been able to wrap their toes around a branch and then use their big toe to secure a hold on the branch. It's the same way you'd reach up and grab a stick or something, and you'd wrap your fingers around the thing, and then you'd lock your thumb over your fingers to help to give you a good grip. Our ancestors could do that with their toes, right? Now, obviously, well, maybe not obviously, but see if this makes sense to you. When our ancestors decided this tree thing wasn't working out for them and came down and went to the plains, to the grasslands, down for food, if they had feet like that, they had feet with this massive toe that is jutting out towards the side, like what you have on your hand for your thumb, and a shorter foot overall, it means that walking would swiftly become painful because you would not be able to distribute the weight of your body efficiently on a foot like that. If you're climbing a tree, it's great, right? So of course that would have driven evolution of our feet. So the moment we started this whole walking around more than we climb tree business, our feet had to change their shape, right? Now, that said, even to this day, when you see people climbing trees, what do they normally do? They take the side of the medial side of the foot and they put it against the tree and they try to curl their toes around. I don't know if you've ever seen like people climb like coconut trees or these things. But when you look at their feet, the way because they climb barefoot, a lot of them, it's actually a lot easier to climb barefoot because your toes, even though they're shorter now than in your ancestors, even though your big toe it has lost so much of its function, it can still help you to grip onto a surface as you're trying to climb. And so you also have, I don't even know what a free climber. Y'all ever hear about free climbers? These crazy people? Anybody ever heard of a free climber? All right. You know, normally mountain climbers, people who climb like these things for fun, they have like gear, ropes and pulleys and carabiners and all these things and hammers. And as they're going up, they're banging in stakes into the walls to support themselves so they don't fall to their death. These free climbing people just climb. No ropes, no nothing, just their fingers, and normally they'll climb barefoot and up the side of the hill they go. Up the side of the cliff they'll go, right? Climbing very similar to the way their distant ancestors would have climbed, right? And if I'm honest, some of them are amazing athletes, right? Some of them are strong enough to support their entire body weight on a finger, right? Anyway, so the shape of the foot, remember, has changed in the past few 100,000 years to this shape here. Why do we have this shape? If you look at the foot of a gorilla, for example, or a chimpanzee, and compare it to the size of their hands, There's not a lot of difference between their hands and their feet size. Human beings, totally different things. You've, I don't know about you, but I've never met a human whose foot is smaller than his hand. That would be crazy. Unless you have a medical problem or something, right? So you have larger, broader feet, right? Which now means that the equivalent of the palm, right, which of course would be the carpal bones, have to elongate, they have to broaden, they have to thicken because you have bigger feet. Why do you have bigger feet? Because you're walking up and down the place more than you're climbing. So you need these heavier, denser bones to support the weight of your body, right? Hopefully that makes sense, right? And do not underestimate the importance of your toes in general. I just mentioned to you how important your toes are to climbing, and that climbing barefoot is easier than climbing in shoes because you can curl your toes in to get some amount of grip, right? I mean, y'all probably too old to be climbing trees now anyway, but trust me, it makes a difference. But here's the thing. Well, let me ask a simple question. How many of you wear shoes at home? You come home, you take off one pair of shoes, you put on a pair of slippers, you put on another pair of shoes. You don't walk around barefoot. You know? Um, Alexia, what about you?
Sir?
Do you walk around barefoot? Or you have on shoes when you're at home?
Sorry, I'm barefoot.
I'm not hearing you. All right, give me a second. Let me increase the volume of the speaker. Yeah, I'm asking, do you guys walk around with shoes on at home? I'm talking about at home. Obviously, you're supposed to wear shoes when you're on the road. But I'm saying at home, do you still have on shoes or slippers or Crocs or something like that? Does anybody go barefoot when you're at home? So Robin, all right.
Sir, I walk barefoot, but I know someone that like always wear like socks, like
The
like
socks are not so bad. But let me explain why I bring this up. I just said to you, your feet have evolved to bear the weight of your body walking around, right? Your mother always wears slippers. All right. There is an issue that we are realizing when it comes to shoes and your spine in particular. Okay? People who wear shoes more often are more likely to have back problems and spinal problems, particularly later on in life. See if this makes sense to you. If you've ever seen children run around barefoot, the way they walk is very different from the way before they put on shoes. It's very different from the way people who wear shoes walk, right? Here's what I mean. When you're walking in shoes, you can't feel the ground beneath you. So normally, when you're walking, you put down your calcaneal first. As in, you lift your foot, you put it down, is the heel go down on the ground first, then the rest of the foot falls forward, right? But as you're doing that, especially if you're walking fast, you're essentially slamming your heel into the ground over and over and over, thousands of times a day. And the force of that is transmitted up your spine into your vertebral column. And over time, it's going to take years. It can actually distort your vertebra and increase your chance of getting back problems, right? Now, if you're walking without shoes, what do you normally do? Because you can feel the ground, usually you use your toes first. So instead of going heel to toe, you go toes first, then you put down your heel, right? So toe heel is a more natural way of walking. All right, when you look at toddlers first learning how to walk, they don't slam the heel down on the ground. It's always toe, heel, toe, heel. So what we realize is that excessive, let's call it excessive shoes wearing, causes the bad habit to develop in you. So when you're walking, you put down your heel first, and then instead of your toes first, right? Now, I'm listen. You would know better than I do when you're walking how you walk, right? Just keep it. Just think about it as when you get up and walk, what is hitting the ground first? Is it your heel or is it your toes? Right? Because it will make a difference later on in how much back problem you get. I already said to human beings are very prone to have back problems. So if you then rope in the shoes thing on top of it, you're even more prone to having back problems because of that. Okay? Now, if you're wearing like very, very thin shoes, then you can still put your toes down first because you can still feel the ground beneath you. So that is why the socks are not a problem, right? But if you try this walk, if you just take off your shoes and walk up and down the place barefoot, the same way you walk up and down in the shoes, in no time your back hurts you. Because once again, you're slamming your heel down on the ground, that force is transmitted up your back. So, these days you can buy what they call barefoot shoes. The idea of the shoes, of course, is that they're thin on the bottom and that they actually have compartments for your toes, right? That's another thing. When you're walking toe first, when your toes hit the ground, they spread out, right? So they spread they spread out. And when the toes spread out, when you put them down, it gives you a better grip on the ground. It also helps to balance your weight better as you're walking, right? So the barefoot shoes have a little compartment. The barefoot shoes, I don't know, I've never owned a pair. But sometimes you see them, athletes, and they have little compartments for each toe. It must be a pain in the ass to put on. But I am told that they work better than just walking with normal shoes because they allow the person to put their toes down first and spread them out and spread out the weight, right? All right. So yeah, I suppose what I'm saying to you is that you really should be wearing shoes at home, right? Because if you've trained yourself to wear shoes and you can't do without the shoes, and it trains your walking pattern badly, and it can lead to problems later on in life, right? Anyway, we'll leave that alone. Instead, now let's talk about arches. Okay. If you walk barefoot, your foot get big. Oh, that's a good one. What am I going to say? Okay, all right. First of all, the size of your foot is going to be partially genetically determined, right? So if you born with big foot genes, your foot are gonna be big. There's nothing in the world that can stop that, right? Secondly, is there any truth behind this thing? If you walk around barefoot, your foot get big? I mean, yeah, there is some truth to it, but it's a temporary truth. Here's what I mean. When you're walking around barefoot, the weight of your body, as I said, presses down on the bones of the feet and they spread out, right? And as they spread out to absorb better the impact of you walking around the place, right? And even during the course of the day, the weight of the rate of gravity pulls plasma out of the capillaries in the feet, and you end up with your feet swelling up during the course of the day. Okay? So all of this leads to a simple fact. Your feet are smaller in the morning, and throughout the course of the day, they get bigger. Right? But you go sleep and wake up again, they go back to the regular size. If you're wearing shoes that are too tight, your feet don't spread out properly, and it can put pressure on your toes. And once again, you must and this happens a lot in women who like wear these tight up shoes, especially the ones that have like a triangular triangle at the front of them. Why anybody would want to wear these, I have no idea. So they have the like the sharp point. When a woman and they wear the heels, so imagine this now. You're wearing a pair of heels, right? The heels are causing your foot to slide forward, right? So your foot is sliding in that direction, right? Now this is the front of the shoes, right? So your feet are sliding forward into this narrow gap, and the weight of your body is pressing the feet in there. So instead of spreading out naturally the way they should, you're confining your feet and putting extra pressure on the bones. So over a period of years, you must have seen women who wear a lot of high heels. When them take off them shoes and you look at their toes look deformed. Now you tell me, would you rather have deformed feet or broad feet? Because broad feet are better for you, right? Broad feet can take care of the weight of your body. Broad feet can withstand some punishment. Anyway. But yeah, technically speaking, they are correct. Your feet do get broader as you walk around without shoes. But even so, I will say this last thing and then I move on. When you go shopping for shoes, the orthodoxy states never buy shoes in the morning. Only buy them in the evening. Because your feet are at their smallest in the morning and they're at their largest towards evening. As I said, they swell during the course of the day with all the walking up and down, right? So just keep us in mind. When you order a pair of shoes, when you buy a pair of shoes, buy it after 4 o'clock or after 2 o'clock. Get a better judge of the real size of your shoes. Or you buy shoes 9 o'clock and the next morning now try to wear them and by afternoon your shoes tight, right? Anyway. Let's now talk about the arches of the foot. If you notice here, the calcaneal nail, this part will be touching the ground. And of course, your toes will be touching the ground. But this part here of your foot forms an arch. And the arch is not touching the ground. Right? So when I'm talking about the arch of the foot, that's what I'm talking about. Okay? Now, the arch here is extremely important. Right? The arch actually evolved to allow human beings to walk for long distances, right? If there's one thing human beings are very good at, when we do evolution, I'll talk more about this, but I think I mentioned it before, that human beings are fairly terrible animals, right? We're not very good at very much, right? As I said, we're weak for our height, we're our size, we're slow for our size, and our stamina is relatively low when carrying heavy things, right? So human beings are fairly terrible animals. If you took a human being that weighs 150 pounds and you put him in a cage with a dog that weighs 100 pounds, you know who's coming out on top. And it ain't in person, right? You must have heard about pit bulls mauling people to death. Pit bull weigh like 60 pounds and kill a 100-pound person, 150-pound person. That's crazy, right? So human beings are fairly terrible animals. However, if there's one thing human beings are very good at, and obviously thinking and tool making are going to be on the top of the list. But the next thing on the list is going to be running. Well, technically jogging for extreme distances. There's a reason why pretty much every culture on the planet, when it comes to sports, they have marathons. Human beings are built for marathons, right? What is a marathon? Jog for a long period of time, basically, right? And the arch on your foot here has evolved to help you to do that. The ligaments that that run between the bones here, okay? So you have the ligaments like that. They act as little springs. Okay? When you put your foot flat down on the ground, your foot flattens, right? And it pulls the ligaments. And the ligaments stretch out a little bit. And when you're ready to lift your foot, ligaments pull back to the original position. And they actually have to push your foot up. So it's like, once again, it's like you're walking on springs. So the arch allows you to do that. So every step you take, some of the energy that you put in to putting the foot down is captured by the ligaments in the arch. And when you want to lift your foot up, some of that energy is returned to your body to raise your foot. This makes it easier for human beings to walk, makes it easier for human beings to jog, right? Especially for long periods of time, right? Now, that said, some people are born with what we call flat feet. They do not have the arch that they should, right? The ligaments are too stretchy, so the bones essentially lie flat, and the bones pretty much press down on the ground. Well, obviously, their skin and muscles cover them, but you understand what I'm saying, right? If you have flat feet, every time you step down, the entire weight of the body is put on the muscles and the bones. There are no ligaments there to absorb the impact. So you'll find you and somebody else that are at the same fitness level, you both of you go for a walk, in no time your feet start to hurt you, and the other person's feet are fine, right? So if you look at the bottom of your feet, when your feet are flat, see if you can see the arch, right? If you do not see an arch, you have flat feet. And you are not able to walk as well as another person, right? This is one of the reasons, of course, why certain jobs you're not allowed to have if you have flat feet. Alex, you had a question?
Sir, it was me, sir.
Oh, sorry.
Sir, when I was going to prep school, sir, they used to look at flat feet and say when you have flat feet, you can run faster.
No, that's foolishness.
Oh,
That is absolute foolishness. This is the exact opposite, because even when you're running, the arch in the foot, once again, stores energy, because remember, it's a spring, right? There are no top runners anywhere in the world that have flat feet, right? None of them. Whether it's a marathon, a sprint, a half marathon, nothing. Even cyclists, and it should make a difference to them, but some of the cyclists don't have flat feet either, right? It is a disadvantage to have flat feet. So, for example, you're not, for the most part, police, it used to be if you have flat feet, no police job. Because why? Police had to walk up and down the beats, right? If you have flat feet, you walk up and down for an hour or two, your feet start to hurt you. You know, a criminal runs away, you're not running after them because your foot hurt you already. That's too much trouble. Soldiers, what do soldiers do most of their day? They march and they march and they march. Can't do that with flat feet, right? So it used to be that if you were a soldier, well, you could not be a soldier or a police with flat feet. You couldn't even be a security guard. But I think they've kind of eased up on that restriction now. Since so many security guards spend the entire time on their butts anyway. But yeah, there's nothing good about having flat feet. Right? At least not that I can think of. Anyway, so hopefully that makes sense to you. So you can check your own foot to see whether or not your feet are flat or the curve is very slight. Remember, the better the arch is, generally speaking, the less pain you will feel after a long walk. Right? If you do a long walk and you feel your feet hurting you, it might be because you have an issue with flat feet. And there is some genetic component to this one, right? Okay, so that is it for bones. We are now officially done with bones. Now, we're now moving into the muscular system. All right. Now, your first in-course test is gonna be skeletal system, muscular system, and what was the other one? Let's just make sure. Let me bring up your syllabus real quick. Yeah, for this one I have the syllabus here. All right, I'm not seeing a syllabus. Give me a quick second. Let me dig it up. Did I do that syllabus lower? All right. All right. I'll just take it off of the Moodle real quick so that we can review it. Let me things down again. Right. So we have 6 units here. Skeletal, muscular are 2 of the longer units. Then we have nervous system, which is also another long unit. But endocrine system is pretty short. Digestive system is relatively short. And then we have excretory system. So what we'll do is maybe I'll do skeletal, muscular, and half a nervous system. And then we'll do the endocrine, rest of the nervous system, and then maybe we'll leave the urinary for the final exam, right? But definitely, these first 2 are coming. Then we'll see how far along we get for the nervous system before we do test 2. All right. So with that in mind, let's start. Or about 15 minutes left. So let's start our muscular system. Okay. Now, first of all, when we say muscular system, we are referring to your skeletal muscles. Okay. So we're only talking about your skeletal muscles. Remember, your skeletal muscles are the ones that are directly attached to your skeleton. Hence, they're called skeletal muscles, right? Nice and obvious. Now, when we are identifying muscles of the skeletal muscular system, there are a few criteria we use when we're doing the identification, right? First in course dates. This is what? Is this the 3rd or 4th week of class? Is it? I think it's like, I swear this feels like the 3rd week. I could be wrong. Assuming this is the 3rd week of class, then I'm looking for week 5 for the first in course test. All right. So that's like 2 weeks from now. Anyway. That said, when we are trying to identify muscles, we look at the way the muscles are arranged. Okay. So we have our skeletal muscles, of course, are made up of cells, right? And we call one skeletal muscle cell, a muscle fiber. And just to remind you real quick, your skeletal muscles, the cells themselves are very, very long, right? They have the nuclei, they have multiple nuclei in them, which tend to be sort of flat looking. And they tend to be pressed up along the periphery, and then they tend to be striated a lot. Right? You have a lot of these striations running down them. So that would be like one skeletal muscle, fiber. Okay? So remember, fiber and cell, same thing. Now, when you group skeletal muscle fibers together, you form a fascicle, right? So a fascicle is a bundle of skeletal muscle cells that are all grouped together, and you're grouping them together because they're all pulling in the same, well, they're pulling along in the same direction, okay? Now, you can have multiple fascicles in the same muscle, right? And they're all going to be connected to 2 points. In order for a muscle to work in a skeletal system, it has to be connected to 2 bones, okay? That makes sense, of course, right? So your muscle can't move something unless it is pulling on one side, which will not move, and then pulls on another side that will move. Think of a door. When you want to open and close a door, the door is attached to the hinges, and the door doesn't move very much on the hinge side, but on the other side, it swings wide, right? So therefore, your joint acts like that. So the muscle has to be connected to a bone that doesn't move very much on one side, and into another bone that does most of the movement across a joint, right? All right. So with that in mind, right, we're going to talk now about the different categories of skeletal muscle. Remember, we're talking about how the fascicles are arranged in the muscle. Remember the fascicles, bundle of muscle cells / muscle fibers, same thing, right? And these guys are pulling in the same direction. Remember, muscles can only pull. There's no muscle on your body that can push, right? All right, so it says muscle organization affects power, range, and speed of muscle movement. True. All right, the fascicles, remember, are muscle cell fibers arranged in bundles, which we just spoke about. And now we classify the skeletal muscles based on how the fascicles are organized. So there are 4 major ways in which we can organize these fascicles. We have parallel organization, right? That simply means all the fascicles. Let's say this is a bundle here. That looks weird. So it's parallel if all the fascicles, let's say that's one fascicle here. I remember the fascicle has muscle fibers in it. So those lines represent the muscle cells. So if all the muscle fibers are essentially running in the same direction, okay? That now means this muscle can contract, can pull this way, right? It can't go up, it can't go down. It can either contract and pull inwards or relax. That's all it can do. So it can get shorter or it can get longer. When it contracts, it'll get shorter because the muscle pulls on itself and all the fibers are running in the same direction, right? Or it can relax and spread out and get longer. That's all it can do. Once again, because all of the fascicles, hence all of the muscle fibers, are running in the same direction. So that's the biceps brachii. So here we go. Parallel muscles, remember, the fibers run along the same axis of the muscle. They all run parallel. And remember, within the muscle, you have fascicles, which remember are bundles of muscle fibers. There are bundles of muscle fibers. And these muscle fibers are covered, of course, in connective tissue layer to separate them from the others. Right? Which, of course, is the fascia. So here we have one fascicle surrounded by its own little membrane. There's another fascicle surrounded by its own little membrane, right? But all of these fascicles, remember, all of the muscles in them are pulling in the same direction. So it mentions the biceps brachii. The biceps brachii now, of course, is one of the muscles of your forearm. I think basically everybody knows biceps brachii, right? Which of course is A. This is the one that allows you to flex your elbow joint, which of course means when you use the biceps brachii, it moves your forearm closer to your body, right? So flexing your elbow joint, like you're trying to tap yourself on your own shoulder. So you're moving your right hand to tap yourself on the right shoulder. You are flexing your elbow joint, and you're using the biceps brachii to do that flexing. Okay. Now, generally speaking, parallel muscles are pretty strong muscles, right? So they can lift quite a lot of weight. Assuming that you train them enough, right? So that is your first arrangement, parallel. The next arrangement now is going to be convergent muscles. Now, once you hear the term converge, at least I'm assuming everybody remembers what converge means. It means moving towards a single point. So let's say, for example, you have a point here. Converge means everybody's moving in that direction. Coming from multiple places, and you're converging here. It's like going to Champs. I don't know if any of you have ever been to Champs. You have schools from all over Jamaica that converge on the stadium. That's the idea, right? Now, so therefore, based on the word convergent, it clearly the fascicles are all not necessarily coming in the same plane, so they're not parallel. So they're probably coming from different. Their starting point is going to be different, but they're all moving towards the same point. Okay, different start in parallel muscles. Pretty much everybody's starting the same direction, moving in the same direction, right? In convergent, you're not starting at the same place, but you're moving towards the same goal, right? So, convergent muscles. So you can see here, the base of the muscle is broad. It's kind of looks like a seashell, right? And you can see the individual fascicles running down it. So I'm saying that the angle of the fascicles is going to be different. So remember, all of these are fascicles. Remember, you can see the muscle fibers inside the fascicle. So I can just briefly show this one here, so. All right? So that now means the angle at which they're coming down towards the tendon is going to be different for each fascicle. But they're all converging on this tendon here. And this tendon, of course, as you know, tendons connect muscles to bones. So this tendon is going to be attached to a bone. Now, because of this arrangement of the muscles, it means if you contract these fascicles here, right, and leave the rest relaxed, you pull the tendon in that direction, which means you're pulling the body part you're attached to up in that direction. However, if you instead contract these down here, you're pulling in that direction instead, right? So whereas parallel muscles, all they can do is get shorter and everybody's pulling in the same direction, So you only like one kind of movement you can get, which is of course flexion, where the convergent muscle, different parts of the muscle can contract and give you different angles, right? So it mentions here the pectoralis muscle, pectoralis major, which is B here, is a convergent muscle. That now means, of course, since the pectoralis muscle is connected, as you can see here, to your humerus, you can use the convergent muscle to move your humerus up, middle, down, rotate it in, rotate it out, all sorts of movements because of the convergent muscles that are attached to it, right? So you have a far wider range of motion with convergent muscles than you do the parallel muscles, right? All right. I mentioned the strength of the parallel muscles already, right? But I didn't mention that. Well, I mean, it says they shorten about 30%, right? Which is fine. But this is what I want to mention because this holds true for muscles in general. Generally speaking, every additional square inch of muscle you have, cross-section now, right? So if you cut the muscle like this, every additional square inch you have gives you an additional 50 pounds of pulling power. So what does this mean? It means literally bigger muscles equals lift more. I mean, everybody knows that. All right? You've never seen a weak person with big muscles. At least I've never seen a weak person with big muscles. That said, you do have some people who fake the muscles. I've seen people do this now. They inject something into them called synthol. I don't know if you've ever heard of this. So you have, just like, women put on makeup to look pretty. Some men will inject synthol into their bodies, and the synthol is used to shape their arms and legs so they appear to be muscular. But basically they're full of synthol. So they're just as weak as all hell, right? But they look muscular. Anyway. It's 3:45, so I'll stop. So tomorrow or whenever we'll not tomorrow, Thursday we'll continue, right? Just remember now, please, that because the fascicles are coming from different angles and all coming to a central point, depending on which fascicles you're contracting, you get different angles of movement, right? If you contract the middle ones, of course, you go that way. That's the important part here, right? Whereas something like your parallel muscles can only pull in one direction because all of them are basically starting at the same point, ending at the same point, right? All right, we'll stop here. And we will pick up on Thursday. All right, folks, have a good rest of your afternoon. I will speak to you all later.